Barnaby Jones will return next Thursday night at 10, 9 Central and Mountain on most of these stations.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. It's been called one of the top 3 real Comic-Cons in the USA. August 16th through the 18th. Discover Terrificon as it returns to the Mohegan Sun Expo Center in Uncasville, Connecticut. Terrificon showrunner Mitch Halleck has assembled his biggest and best comic creator guest list to date. Jim Lee, Scotty Young, Mark Waid, Adam Hughes, Jason Aaron, Charles Soule, Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo, Brian Azzarello, alongside legends like Chris Claremont, Jerry Ordway, Howard Chaykin, Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, Louise and Walter Simonson, Klaus Janson, Lee Weeks, and dozens more. Terrificon also brings you the actors who have brought your favorite superheroes to life on the big and small screens. Michael Rooker, Charlie Cox, Star Trek actors Walter Koenig, Nana Visitor, Armin Shimmerman, Ethan Peck, Celia Rose Gooding, and many more. That's Terrificon, August 16th through the 18th. For information on tickets and guests, visit Terrificon.com. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. As I was telling him off the air, I've wanted to have Andy Diggle on my show for a really long time. I'm a big fan of your work, Andy. Welcome to Word Balloon.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Pleasure to be here.
Excited to talk to you about, good Lord, a laundry list of stuff. We're going to go way back, but I want to start with the upcoming great news story you're going to do for DC, an Elseworld story, right? Gotham Gaslight, the Kryptonian Age. I think that's a hint of where this story is going, obviously.
Do you think I was too subtle with that title?
So how did this happen, Andy? Did they come to you? Did you pitch this to them?
Funnily enough, it happened almost by accident. It started off with Ben Abernathy asked me if I had any ideas for Elseworlds. He'd mentioned for a while last year that he was trying to get a new line of Elseworlds books off the ground, and he had to run it past the powers that be at DC. But I always loved the whole concept of Elseworlds, going right back to the original Gotham by Gaslight. At the time, I was telling Ben that I was kind of too busy to take it on. Because I was like neck deep in writing The Expanse from Boom Studios at the time, which is something I'm a huge fan of. But that's a very technical, very demanding book where I was doing lots of kind of behind the scenes stuff, finding reference and so on. And I was kind of getting stressed out by it. And the idea of taking on something new, I was like a bit reluctant. But I said to Ben, this is just me kind of like rambling in an email. I said, well, if I was in your position and you're looking for Elseworlds ideas, if I were you, I would expand the world of Gotham by Gaslight, because all we ever saw was Batman and Gotham. So where are all the other heroes and villains of the DCU in, the 1880s, 1890s? And I just started, we had a little back and forth via email, and I just started bouncing ideas about, here's what you could do with Wonder Woman, here's what you could do with Green Lantern. And I realized that I was kind of getting into it. I was kind of riffing on this thing, and this was meant to be me turning it down. And then Ben said, dude, this stuff's amazing. You have to write this. And I kind of realized he was right. I was kind of like, I got inspired by accident, just kind of imagining all the possibilities. So he asked me to put it together into a pitch, which I did. And it got the green light. It's been a pretty smooth process, getting the whole thing up and running. But I was a fan of the original Gotham by Gaslight way back when it first came out. Like the extraordinary artwork by Mike Mignola, and I think Batman just really lends himself to that whole kind of gothic, smoky, back alley 1880s kind of vibe. But it's such an interesting time period. Like us Brits, when we think of the 1880s, we automatically go to kind of Jack the Ripper, Victorian London type cliches. Sherlock Holmes, and I guess maybe for Americans, when you think 1880s, you're more likely to think of like Westerns, like late Westerns or whatever. Sure. And I just thought it'd be really fun to kind of combine both of those styles. Because if we're going to get outside of Gotham, well, let's explore the whole world. You know, so not often Gotham, but we get to see, 1880s or early 1890s by this point. Kansas and Arabia. We get around, and other places that I won't spoil that are much further afield. I think it's fair to say.
Is this a mini series or is this an ongoing? I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
Well, it's a maxi series, really. It's 12 issues all told. But what we're doing is we're pausing after the first 6 issues to give readers who missed the boat a chance to catch up. And then they'll collect the trade paperback of the first 6 issues. It'll be a nice, fat 6-issue book. And then issue 7 will come out for the second half. So and also we want to make sure that Leo has got plenty of time for the artwork because he's doing this incredibly beautiful, detailed art. And we don't want to have to rush it. Plus, I'll admit it, I'm a terribly slow writer. I drive my editors crazy. I overthink everything. We wanted to get it right, because it's we want it to feel a little bit different from everything else that's out there. Part of that is taking the time to get the kind of period detail right, and part of it is just doing justice to the characters, and these environments, because everything's new. We're building a whole new world, outside of Gotham. It's fun. Your viewers might get confused about some of the promotion because sometimes it says 6 issues, sometimes it says 12. That's the reason. The first half of it is 6 issues and then the pause. So it's maybe a little bit presumptuous to assume that not everybody's going to manage to get issue 1, but we're hoping that it's going to, we're hoping to find as many readers as possible. We want you to jump in.
I'm glad they're bringing back Elseworlds because I was always a fan as well. I talked to Tom Taylor earlier in the week, and he is excited to dip in that world as well. They haven't announced anything yet, but I know he's working on some stuff. I always appreciate it. Tom's another example of this, although in Australia, the non-Americans that write American characters. I really think it's great because you bring a different perspective naturally. And, it's kind of exciting to see what nooks and crannies you see in these characters that maybe we take for granted, or even the writers, given who preceded them, might be like, well, I want to color within the lines. I don't want to deviate beyond the norms of a Batman or the Justice League in general. This obviously allows you to go even further given the setting. But, and again, I don't know how self-aware you are in terms of, well, this has never been explored before. I want to bring out this aspect of a character.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I think it's always a balancing act, regardless of whether, British or American or whatever writer. I think that what you're saying is absolutely true. Like, on the one hand, you've got a certain amount of leeway about what's appropriate, what feels like an appropriate Batman story. If you push it too far, it starts to feel like this isn't really what I want from a Batman comic necessarily. But if you just stay completely within the lines, then it just feels a bit samey. It kind of feels like we've seen all this before. You're just regurgitating tropes here.
Yeah.
So it's always a question of trying to, make it. I had the same thing when I was writing James Bond for Dynamite as well. On the one hand, you've got there are certain things that everybody wants and expects from a Bond story, but on the other hand, you don't want to feel like you're just going through the motions. So it's like, how far can I push it? How far can I bend the rules a little bit? And of course, we've got a lot more leeway because we're building out a whole new world. It's set in 1893, and we're getting to see a whole bunch of characters that we didn't get a chance to see in the original Gotham by Gaslight or the sequel Master of the Future.
Yes.
So it makes it quite a difficult writing job because, on the one hand, I've got to introduce a whole bunch of new heroes and villains without getting too weighed down in exposition. And on the other hand, it's actually a really fun challenge because, of course, the readers will already be bringing in their own weight of expectation for each of these characters. Everybody's got their own idea of what, the right way to do Wonder Woman or the right way to do Green Lantern. And here we get to go way outside of the traditional lines. Batman is fairly similar, very largely similar to the version we're used to. With other characters, I get to bend the rules a bit more. So people hopefully will be surprised by some of the backgrounds and backstories and origin stories we've got. Some of them are quite similar. Some of them are very different. Yeah, no, but I'm actually really happy with the way it's working out. I hope everybody else will be.
That's terrific, man. No. Again, I mean, you're. I've always appreciated your DC stories. I'm glad you mentioned James Bond because I really enjoyed what you did with Bond at Dynamite as well. It's yeah, that must have was that like a thrill to be able to. I mean, beyond obviously the movies, obviously I don't even know how the novels do there, but of course I think too of the comic strip and stuff that even preceded the films. And I've always been a fan reading the reprints of the comic strips that McCluskey and I forget who else was making that comic strip. But yeah, I'm a big Bond fan.
Yeah, no, that was a real thrill. It was one of those, you feel like the weight of the legacy on you, like, don't mess this up, because people who don't normally read comics are going to be reading this because they're Bond fans. So again, it's a similar challenge in terms of like how close you hew to what's familiar. But it was an interesting challenge because like everybody's used to the Bond movies and there's a certain amount of sort of, tropes and so on that people expect from that. And then there are fans of the original novels from the 50s and 60s, which are a lot more kind of sedate in their own way, a lot more grounded. And Bond is a slightly more fully rounded character. You actually get to see a bit more, get a sense of his kind of moral character from the inside. But of course, it's set during the Cold War, so there's this great power rivalry. And the idea of taking Bond from the novels and putting him into the present day. So you kind of get a little bit of both. So it feels a bit like the movies, but a bit like the books, So I deliberately tried to write him like his dialogue was slightly a man out of time. Like there was a certain old fashioned, not exactly gentlemanliness, because he can be very ungentlemanly, but you know what I mean? He's polite and reserved until he isn't. And then you're in trouble,
Absolutely. No, that was some of the fun, obviously, of Connery's portrayal. And also I loved when Judi Dench told Pierce Brosnan, "You're a dinosaur, 007," and it's true. And also, that's interesting to hear. We're learning new wrinkles of the today's modern espionage world, unfortunately, because we hear about a Putin plot or something like that. But I've had this conversation with Matt Wagner, where he always felt that characters were operated best in the era in which they were created. Obviously, with Gotham by Gaslight, you're putting them in this 1890s world, all the Justice League characters and villains that we're likely to see. But regarding Bond, I mean, how do you feel about that? Because yeah, like you said, this was very very much a Cold War character from his creation to the pinnacle of his popularity.
Yeah, well, one of the things I was most pleased with, and I knew there was going to be other writers after me. I only had a limited amount of time to make my mark on it.
Sure.
So I tried to do two things. One is you need a megalomaniac villain with a crazy plan that actually makes sense. So I had fun doing that. But then for Kill Chain, the second arc I did, I really wanted it. I wanted to go let people know that there kind of is a Cold War going on right now with Russia, and it's kind of just because the bullets aren't necessarily flying doesn't mean that they're not trying to undermine our elections and hack our military and all the rest of it. But like nobody seems to notice or care outside of sort of military and espionage circles. So the thing I really wanted to do was bring back SMERSH, the Russian like special activities division. They were the villains in all of the early Fleming novels, and in the movies they replaced him with Spectre, a sort of generic terrorist organization. And I thought, no, like now's the time to bring back SMERSH. It just feels really appropriate. And funny enough, that story I was pitching back in 2015, early 2016, before any of this kind of Trump Russia stuff, whether it's true or not, started making headlines. I was reading more about like, what was actually going on at the time in Ukraine, thinking, well, what if they did that over here? And, fast forward on nearly 10 years, it's kind of like, yeah, we should all have been paying more attention back then,
Totally. No, I agree with that. Well, that's a good place to lateral to my first discovery of your work. And, that's, of course, The Losers, because, again, that's some great espionage wet work stuff. Man, I'll tell you, the art is always the front door of what is this? I mean, and again, not knowing what you guys did at 20 AD with, was it Lenny Zero? Am I right? Was that your?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. God. And then I opened the book and then I start reading it and it's like, oh man, you guys had me at hello. I mean, what a terrific series. I really, and again, this was literally like in the 90s, you're out of college, you don't have money. So you're not buying comics and stuff. And then all of a sudden, all right, I can afford comics again. And my God, it was such a revelatory book that I'm like, this doesn't look like anything else on the stands right now. And it doesn't read like anything else on the stands right now. This is a group of anti-heroes that are doing what they need to do to survive. And it's I just adored it. Can you tell me about the creation of the Losers?
Sure. I mean, that's really kind of you. Thank you. Like, I need to go back and revisit the Losers because it's so long since I actually wrote it, and I hadn't reread it in years. So, like, usually I wince when I look back at my old work, just thinking of all the things I could have done better, you know. But like, it's nice to know that it still works, you know. But no, the Losers came about because me and Jock had first started working together at 2000 AD. And you know, I loved Jock's work as soon as I saw it, and so I kind of jumped at the chance to work with him whenever I could. So yeah, we did a couple of short things for 2000 AD and the Judge Dredd magazine. A couple of short stories that are kind of set in the world of Judge Dredd, but don't really feature him as the main character. Sort of, kind of like Elmore Leonard in the future was the way I was kind of imagining that. I kind of like, you know, or you know, Ocean's 11 kind of vibe, but you know, with crazy futuristic stuff. And it was fun because like Mega City 1 is such a playground that me and Jock, you know, knew and loved. So that was just a lot of fun to do, and the readers seemed to like it. And that kind of like we used that as our sort of pitch to Will Dennis at Vertigo, because he was, you know, like we liked the kind of stuff he was putting out. You know, he'd been recommended to us by, I think it was Garth Ennis, said, you know, if you get it, because me and Jock really wanted to pitch for Hellblazer, that we were big long-term Hellblazer fans.
Sure.
And Garth was like, you know, Will Dennis is the guy to talk to. So we did. But funnily enough, it originally, what was it? Like the first thing I got to do was Lady Constantine for Will, which was a real thrill, getting to sort of play in Neil Gaiman's sandbox there. And then when the Losers started coming together, about the same time, they asked me to do like a Swamp Thing mini, because they'd liked what I did with the way I tied Lady Constantine into like both Sandman and Hellblazer continuity. And that would, like, you know, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing is kind of like, that's one of the things that made me want to become a writer in the first place, you know. So that was a huge honor. And I was kind of lobbying to get Jock to draw Swamp Thing at the time, because I really wanted to work with him again. And I thought Swamp Thing was going to be the bigger book, because everybody's heard of Swamp Thing, but nobody's heard of the Losers, you know. Of course, I'm an idiot. I was wrong. And fortunately, everybody just told me to shut up and write the comics, so I did. But no, the Losers was it changed so much during the pitch process. Originally, it was going to be set in the 1950s, based on the original World War II characters. Like, it would be them kind of reuniting after the war. To like the idea was there was like a German rocket scientist that smuggled out of Europe in the final days of World War II, and who was now working at Los Alamos, and they kind of felt a bit disgruntled about the fact that they're helping a Nazi escape justice, basically. And in the 50s, they find out there's a cache of hidden gold somewhere in Europe, and this Nazi that they smuggled out is the only guy who knows where it is. So they have to break into Los Alamos to kidnap him to get him out again. That was just going to be like a short mini, but it would have been a lot of fun. But there were some other things in the pipeline or already in print at Vertigo at the time that felt a little similar, like Garth's War Stories and American Century and stuff. So in the end, Will just said, well, why don't you just take the title of the Losers and throw everything else away and start over? Which is kind of what we did. But again, it wasn't pitched as an ongoing series. It was pitched as a mini, maybe sort of 4, 5, 6 issues, something like that. Because I saw it very much as like a caper. And capers always have a very definite end, right? You know, beginning, middle, end. The end of the caper, you've either got the MacGuffin or you haven't. But either way, the story's over. And then it was during that process, they asked me to figure out if I could make it an ongoing. So, you know, and I'm kind of the new kid on the block at the time. So we're like, well, yeah, that's very kind. Thank you. But I was racking my brains. How do you do an ongoing series of capers, you know? Because I knew I wanted to have that kind of tone to it, that fast-paced, kind of snappy kind of tone. And then it was when I realized that the ultimate MacGuffin was the guy they were hunting, the bad guy, Max. Like, okay, so they've got to pull off a whole series of capers in pursuit of that overarching goal. Then that's when it really started coming together, I think. And I always had an idea for the end point. I'm never comfortable doing stories that are going to go on forever, because, you know, stories have to end. Like, that's just the way it's wired. But, you know, I figured that, like, sort of, you know, around 30 issues or so, you know, like I would probably have burned all the fuel I had for that one, you know, and I think it worked out pretty well in the end. But yeah, like, I was so young and inexperienced, and because I was so kind of like I had 2000 AD in my blood, which has a very fast paced kind of storytelling style, very condensed. I think I kind of brought that to the Losers because I was terrified of boring people. I thought if I just let the characters stand around and talk, everyone will get bored. So something has to explode on every page, So reading it now, I'm sure it has a slightly frantic pace to it, but sometimes that's just what you want. You want bang for your buck.
Amen. And that is why it was like, oh my God, this keeps going and everything. And there is excitement in every sequence. No, I loved it, man. And it really was, again, just such an exciting thing. I'm bummed that Vertigo doesn't exist anymore, because even though they still occasionally will tell a DC Vertigo-esque stories, there was something about the imprint that guaranteed a different mindset from the DCU. And I listen, I love Black Label. I'm glad they're doing Elseworlds. I know during Vertigo's height, I was like, oh, it'd be cool to see a Batman Vertigo story. And again, we've gotten similar things with Black Label and things, but yeah, I don't know, man. It just, like how Will was your editor. Did you talk much with Karen Berger while the run was going on as well?
Yeah, at the beginning, certainly when I was putting together like Swamp Thing and the Losers, Karen was like very hands-on. Like it was her idea to like the character of Aisha in the Losers. Originally, in my one of the earlier versions, was actually going to be Colombian. It was more about like the CIA's history in South America, and it was Karen's idea to make her Arab. So I thought, okay, well, that's different. There was a part of me that thought maybe that makes it almost too current, for when it came out. Like it might polarize readers or whatever, based on whatever was going on in the news at the time. Certainly. But now I can't imagine sticking with my original version now, looking back. It was absolutely the right call. Karen was always really, really open and supportive of everything I did there. I felt it was very flattering because, I mean, she'd put out all of the stuff that made me want to write comics in the first place, or like at least all of the American comics that had that influence on me. And this is pre-Vertigo. Like back with Swamp Thing and Animal Man and Shade, Enigma, all just these amazing books. And as you say, I really miss Vertigo, man. It's kind of it's like nothing else. And I agree that Black Label is awesome. We need more of that kind of thing. But like, there's just something you knew that you were going to get something weird and interesting and smart and different with Vertigo. Whatever it was, you could just pick it up and be taken somewhere you'd never been before. And I really miss that.
I'm with you. What did you think of the Losers movie? It's interesting now that we look back and it's like, hey, there's Chris Evans. Hey, there's Zoe Saldana and everything, Right.
I mean, look at that cast. It's incredible. Like me and Jock were really thrilled that they cast it so well. They really cast it for the characters, and those guys are all megastars now, But they flew us out to Puerto Rico to meet everybody, literally during the last couple of days of filming. So of course everybody was exhausted because they've been, filming a very exertive action movie for like 3 months at that point. But when we first met Chris Evans, he was in his hair and makeup and costume. He was basically looked like he'd stepped out of Jock's artwork, And I remember the look on Jock's face when Chris came over, because he just kind of did a double take and like, what the character I invented, designed, is walking over to me and shaking my hand. It was quite surreal. There was an interesting point where we were watching them filming, and Idris Elba was sitting next to us. We're on the little kind of folding chairs at the back of the set trying to be quiet, and me and Jock are whispering to each other about how freaky it is that they look just like the characters we made. It was the hotel bathroom shootout they were filming. And Idris was he was watching us, watching them. We kind of realized he's side-eyeing us. Like, should we not be talking if we annoyed Idris Elba? And we spoke to him about it later, and it turns out he was putting together a character of his own for something else. And he was fascinated by the process of us watching our own creations come to life, because he was thinking of stepping into producing at that point and coming up with his own character or steering his own character. So I don't know, it's slightly weird. It all got a bit meta at that point, But yeah, no, like I think that I love that cast, Like, imagine how much it would cost budgetary wise just to try and put them together on screen now, before you film anything. They're just so famous. Yeah, no, but they were great. They're perfect.
I know it didn't connect with the masses, but I always say it's like, the losers. I liked it, I really did, and again, as you say, now it really is something that might be an overlooked movie that people should go back and check out, given the star power that was in it. You mentioned Idris Elba. I gotta say, man, I really think the Broccolis. I don't know who their plan is for the next Bond, but even now, because somebody like, oh, he's kind of too old to play Bond. I say BS, man. I as Timothy Dalton got older, I'm like, now I see him as Bond. When he was in that Looney Tunes Brendan Fraser movie and he played Brendan Fraser's father, I'm like, that's James Bond, man. That is like, middle-aged James Bond. I'm like, that is absolutely Timothy Dalton. And I mean, my God, Elba is still a great-looking guy, and it's like, hey, man, you want to shake some cages? Idris Elba, and such a brilliant actor too.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that one. Absolutely. Yeah, he'd be perfect.
Yeah, I don't know who they're going to pick. I say no disrespect to the guy, but some people are like, Eddie Redmayne. I'm like, no, thank you. That's all right. Yeah.
I don't have. I used to think that Michael Fassbender would be a good pick.
Sure.
When I first saw it, the first time I ever saw Fassbender in anything was Inglorious Bastards. That amazing scene where he's speaking German and they're all kind of drinking together. And I don't know who this guy is. I'd never seen him before. That guy's a movie star. He's going to be famous because he's got the thing, And I don't know, maybe he's getting a little too old now, or maybe he's not quite got the build for it.
Cool.
Muscle up a bit, but
yeah,
he's kind of late. He can be charming and dangerous, and that's what you need for Bond.
I'm with you, man. Shame on me. I'm so glad you mentioned your Expanse stuff for Boom. I don't know why I've been waiting, because I'm such a massive, good sci-fi fan, and the politics that are in the Expanse. So I haven't really dug into the TV series, but I would imagine. Again, given how much I enjoy your work, I'm sure you're coming up with interesting stories within that universe.
That was a fun challenge. So tell me, are you familiar with the books, or if not the show?
I'm aware of the books, but I haven't read them. And again, okay, well, I certainly appreciate. Yeah, I appreciate the space politics. It reminds me of all the good qualities of Babylon 5, where I think they did a great. Straczynski did a great job with those politics that he laid out. It's, to me, and again, forgive me, but I feel it's what's missing from a lot of the new Star Trek product. And it's like, man, all the elements are there because they certainly exploited them during the Deep Space Nine era. And it's like, you've got this galaxy where we know about all these different alien worlds. Finally, in this last arc of Discovery, we got a little bit of it. But I don't know, man. I keep hearing it's like, well, if you miss hard, well, not necessarily hard sci-fi, but entertaining space opera. The Expanse is really. So I guess I'm now that I'm done. It's Star Trek for me was like my soap opera. It's like those that's my EastEnders, man. I can't not watch, even if it's shit. I still have to watch to hear the story. So now that that's clear and I get a few months and stuff, it's like, all right, maybe I should binge The Expanse in the meantime. And
I can't recommend The Expanse highly enough. And when I was a huge fan of the novels by James S.A. Corey, which is a pen name for Frank and Dan Abraham, the novels are great because it's the perfect blend of like hard science fiction, but it's still got plenty of ship-to-ship combat and daring rescues and escapes and gunfights and crazy stuff. So like each novel has a slightly different flavor. One feels like a space western, another feels like a noir detective story. And the no pun intended, but it expands as it goes along. The scale of it gets bigger and bigger until it literally becomes kind of like galactic in scale. And the TV show does a really good, smart job of adapting it. Like they really care about getting the science right and the characters right and the action right and the politics right, and it really feels like a very faithful adaptation. There's 9 novels, but they only filmed the first 6 for the show.
Right, 6 seasons, yeah.
But the final novels, there's a 30-year time jump between books 6 and 7. The characters all age up by 30 years, which is like a big deal.
Sure.
And for the comic, what they asked me to do was, well, would I basically just cut? They didn't tell me what to write. They didn't have a story, but they said, are you interested in exploring that missing 30 years? And I'm like, yeah, because that's this amazing playground where, there kind of is no continuity. Everything goes quiet for 3 decades. Like, I can do anything I want. I can't do literally anything because, well, I don't want to spoil what happens in the later novels because I'm still hoping one day they will get a chance to film that stuff, whether for the big screen or the small screen. But yeah, so again, it was like we were talking before about staying within the lines. You know, I want to follow I hope I succeeded in following the kind of line of trajectory of the story was already taking at the end of season 6 of the show, because the comic is based on the TV continuity. So it feels like it feels like season 7, you know, but without spoiling what happened in the later novels. I realize I'm being a bit vague here, but I would urge people to check out The Expanse, but I really don't want to spoil it. So yeah, if you funnily enough, your timing's really good because the final issue of the comic just came out this week, issue 12 of Dragon Tooth. So yeah, that is basically, if you want to find out what happens next after season 6, then pick up Dragon Tooth. But it probably won't make a lot of sense to you if you haven't checked out the books or the show.
Oh no, I'll and that, as I said, that's why I'll start with, at the very least, the TV show, and then get to your stuff on it. It's been fun seeing a lot of your ideas make it to the small screen as well. I think back to, again, another wonderful miniseries you did, and that's Green Arrow Year One, and God, that's, I mean, you suspected when you first saw the opening episodes of Green Arrow that it's like, oh, this is Diggle's take on what happened to Oliver and what made him Green Arrow, and then they gift you with creating the character Diggle and naming him after you, which is pretty awesome.
The funny thing is that Mark Guggenheim came up with the character of John Diggle, and he's admitted publicly that he kind of named the character after me as a sort of hat tip, but Mark didn't know at the time that I actually have a brother called John. So
wow.
It's actually like John Diggle is actually my brother. And now of course there's an Andy Diggle in the show as well, So that was actually quite funny. Like my brother, who's not a nerd and is not into comics, like now has his own action figure, which is nice.
That's great, man.
The first we saw of the show, or first I saw of the show, was because Jock had been, I don't know, somehow he had access to bits of an early, I don't know if it was an early cut of the pilot episode, but he sent me a video of it, just saying, "Oh my God, they've done our book," kind of thing, And it was when Ollie was kind of wearing the hood and he's got the cargo shorts, kind of running through the jungle, kind of stuff. And it was just that. It's like, okay, that's our boy, that's our Ollie, So that was really nice to see,
Did you, beyond doing the Year One book, did you ever want to get back to the character? Did you do it at all on a monthly basis in the regular Green Arrow book?
No, I didn't. I was going to do a fill-in at one point. I think was it Ben Percy, I think, was writing at the time. They asked me if I would do a 6-issue fill-in, which I pitched and outlined and got greenlit, and I wrote the first issue of it. And then for whatever reason, they didn't need it anymore. I think I think they were double shipping at the time, and they worried that Ben wouldn't be able to keep up the pace, which is fair enough. But he's a machine. He's fine. That turns out, he was good. So they didn't need it. Okay, fair enough. So that script, I think it's probably the only script I've ever written that's never seen the light of day, I think. It was it was a fun fill-in. But no, to come back to your question, people often ask me after the first one if I would be interested in doing Green Arrow Year 2. And for years I always said, well, no, because I don't really have a story. The fun thing for me is when you get with an origin story, you really get to show a character's arc. You can start off, he's the rich, selfish idiot, and then he learns how to become self-reliant and self-sacrificing, and he actually becomes a hero. But then once he is a hero, then everything feels a little bit set in stone. After that, there's a danger of it just feels like Adventure of the Week kind of thing. And as much as I love Adventures of the Week, I kind of felt like for a year it would need to be more significant story somehow. And it wasn't until last year, I think it was, that a penny dropped in my head, and it's like, wait a minute, I think I've got another Green Arrow story in me. And it would be picking up on some of the threads from the first book. It wouldn't be kind of Hunted on an Island. It would be, he's back in civilization now and kind of adjusting to trying to be, becoming Green Arrow, basically, rather than just surviving the island. It's like, okay, I'm going to be a hero now. How do I do that? And having to deal with, his company and, but there are certain leftover, I won't spoil it, but certain leftover plot elements from the first book that come back to bite him. So it was a way of kind of tying it all together, right? Making it feel relevant and connected, And I'm like, okay, this can actually work. But we'll see. I don't know if DC would be interested in that.
I was going to say, I hope Marie is listening, and that's a possibility, because that would be terrific. Also, it was fun to see Ratcatcher, another Vertigo thing that you did, wind up in James Gunn's the Suicide Squad movie. And how'd you feel about that?
Well, that wasn't my Ratcatcher.
It was it was his daughter.
I did a book called Ratcatcher: A Vertigo Crime.
Pardon me, please.
I stupidly named it after a character that was already a DC villain, and that's on me, but it's not connected.
Oh, I see.
I think the Ratcatcher was that like John Wagner and Alan Grant, I think, invented that character.
Probably.
Batman run, I believe. Because I was reading Batman back then when they were doing it.
Shame on me, man. No, absolutely.
That's fine.
Yeah, mix up the Brits. All right, that's the 81 part. But all right, we'll have a couple more things that I do know you did, and that was your Marvel work. And how did you really? God, we went from Kevin Smith to Quesada to Bendis to Brubaker, and then you coming in with Shadowland, which was a great story. How'd you tell me about working on Daredevil for Marvel?
It was really scary, honestly. That list of names you've just rattled off, following on a pedigree like that, that's kind of intimidating. It's kind of, I really felt the pressure on that. And I found it quite difficult. I wasn't sure I was the right guy for the job, once I was doing it. But yeah, basically we had a big editorial summit, and the Marvel editors basically told me what was going to happen in the story. They said, okay, the Hand's going to take over Hell's Kitchen, and they're going to build a giant Japanese castle in the middle of Manhattan, and they're going to take over, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, Matt Murdock's going to become their leader, and I had a hard time getting my head around making that work. I think, honestly. Okay. And also because they made a big deal of we want to have a big street level crossover with all of the other street level characters, many of whom I wasn't particularly familiar with at the time. I'd read a bunch of Daredevil, but I hadn't read a lot of the other characters.
Yeah,
that they wanted to spin off. So and I wasn't used to long form storytelling that would have this big web of continuity, tying in with other books and so on. So honestly, I felt a little bit out of my depth, And I think Shadowland, I think it's probably one of the best selling things I've ever written. But I think it's probably quite divisive. I mean, some people really love it and some people really hate it. Some people never forgave me for some of the stuff I did in Shadowland, So I don't know. But I guess it's better to be talked about than not talked about. So.
Yeah, that's what Elvis's manager, Colonel Parker. As long as they spell your name right, Elvis, that's the important thing. And no, but I get that. And so, has that made you not want to deal with events? Because I can appreciate that, both your discomfort and also, it sounds like obviously again I remember Axel talking about Shadowland, Axel Alonso, when he was editor in chief, and he was very excited for the project and stuff. But yeah, does that make you want to stay away from a big event book? Because even if we take it back to Gotham by Gaslight, I suppose within its realm, it is kind of an event book. You really are showing the rest of the DC world in this 1890s setting. But, so I don't know if that's a different head for you. Tell me the differences.
Yeah, I guess when I say event, I'm thinking more about multiple different titles that all, that cross over with each other.
Sure.
Goes forward, which I find very difficult because generally everybody just make it up as they go along. It's to be fair, I haven't had much experience with this stuff, so I'm not my opinion, take it or leave it, for what it's worth. But there's people who are better at this stuff and know more about it than I do. But my feeling when I've kind of touched on these things, because I would find myself asking lots of questions of editorial, about where it's all going and. What the bad guy's motivation really is, because you want to know where you're heading. And more often than not, the answer would be, which is not really what you want to hear when you're trying to plan something and working it out with the other writers,
Sure.
I mean, I had an absolute blast writing Adam Strange for DC. That was an 8-issue book. It was just really fun. It was this wonderful playground. the first thing I was told was this is eventually going to lead into the Rand Thanagar War, which is going to be a big multi-title crossover. But you don't have to worry about the continuity because yours is kind of like the precursor book. So you can just do your thing. And I'm like, perfect, great. So, I get the benefits of a crossover without the downsides,
I'm hip.
So I'm writing it. I know where I'm planning to end the book, and I'm constantly checking with editorial, like, are you cool with this? You cool with this? Like, yeah, fine. They said, we're gonna give you some direction on the final issue so it can tie in with everything else. But until then, we're golden. So fine. So I write like the first 7 issues, and I know where the issue 8 that I'm leading it into, and I'm constantly emailing like, is this where you want me to go? And I kept hearing back, like, we'll let you know. And it's getting later and later until eventually they get in touch and just say, okay, here's what's going to happen, and it's a whole bunch of stuff. That's what happens in the book. I'm like, okay, if that's not where I was heading, if I'd known that's where I was heading, I would have taken a different course to get there. I would have lined things up a bit better. But that's it's comics, man. It's they've got bigger fish to fry. They've got other things they need to tie it into. But like, I think, well, bottom line for me is it a good story? That's the only thing that matters. The readers are paying us to tell a story and tell it as well as we can. So I think when it comes to crossovers and so on, I'm entirely happy to I like working with other writers as we figure everything out together and like how to tie stuff together and so on. But you need to do that in advance. You can't really do it on the fly. Well, if everybody's improvising in different directions, it's hard to make things tie together. So having a plan is the key, I think.
Was when you did Dark Reign Thunderbolts, which tied into Bendis's event, was that a better experience?
That was fine. That was a lot of fun because I like writing bad guys. That was just really fun playing with all the villains. Like Dark Reign Thunderbolts, and I did the spin-off Hawkeye Dark Reign.
Yes, where Bullseye was pretending to be Hawkeye. Yeah,
and that was great because I didn't really get messed around too much continuity-wise then. The only thing was when I took on Thunderbolts, like my main reason for wanting to do the book was because I get to write Bullseye and Venom. Like, oh, I'm going to have so much fun with these guys. And then 2 issues in, they took them away from me because they went to join the Avengers. I'm like, damn it, God, get okay. So I had to bring in some other guys, But I got to bring in the Yelena Belova version of Black Widow, who is now going to be headlining the Thunderbolts movie. It's like,
yes,
I put her on that team. So I'm like, yes, that's kind of cool.
That's great. Well, and I'm curious about your 2000 AD years, and I haven't. I always mean to read more, and I've read a bit over the years, but unlike the DC or Marvel worlds where everything has to tie in together, 2000 AD is usually really an anthology, so everyone can really do their own thing for 4 pages or 8 pages, however long the feature is for that particular issue. I've read that people, and again, in some ways, maybe your run as an editor, you were at first an assistant editor to David Bishop. Am I right?
That's right. That's right.
And I know fans of yours are like, God, that was 2000 AD really needed Andy Diggle at an editorial. It really got exciting again. And then some people weren't happy with your choices and stuff. But tell me about the experience. Was it tough? I mean, I certainly see in American comics, the X-Men are a great example of, you got this big collective of fans. And man, you try something different, and they jump all over your ass. How was it? How was it at editing 2000 AD? How long did you run last as editor in chief? Long time.
I never really intended to become an editor, and it was an opportunity arose to start as an office assistant there, and like, well, it's my favorite comic. I've been reading it since I was 10, so I jumped at the chance to just be a part of it. Never expecting I would kind of rise up the ranks and eventually become the editor, which is kind of like a big deal. And I was still pretty young at the time. But I think I was only there a total of about 4 years.
Okay.
Beginning to end. But it sounds terrible to say, but I didn't want to be an editor. I wanted to be a writer, and I learned a hell of a lot. Made a lot of good friends. It was invaluable experience, just learning how comics are put together from the inside. How to marry the script and the art and how the lettering and of course the relentless grind of the weekly deadlines. As you say, it's an anthology. There's 5 different stories every week, and it's a weekly, not a monthly.
Yes.
So that's like 20 separate stories every month.
Right. Well, that's why I thought
deadlines every week, so it's relentless. So it's high pressure, and it's very stressful job. I found it very stressful.
Well, that's why I thought your reign was longer, because the fact that it is a week, there's a lot of issues, obviously.
Yeah. But yeah, like when I did sort of finally take the reins of it, like I kind of, it sounds a little childish, but I wanted to get back the vibe that I loved when I was a kid. Like there's a certain kind of crunchy energy it had in the kind of late 70s, early 80s, and I felt like it had become a little bit too knowing, a little bit too self-satirical somehow, and I wanted to get back, just that kind of good old-fashioned crunchy storytelling. And not everybody's going to be happy with that, but all the feedback I've had from fans has been positive. I mean, we're talking about something that's more than 20 years ago now as well. So
sure,
I don't know. It's not exactly current. My take on all this, but it felt at the time like, I mean, I had enough people walk up to me at shows and say thank you, that I felt I was kind of heading in the right direction. And I kind of put my money where my mouth was as well. Like, I kind of went public with, here's my take on this kind of thing. What do you think? Am I taking the right course or the wrong course? And all the feedback I got from that sort of thing was positive, So I think you're never going to please all the people all the time, but like generally the feedback I got on that was good. But I didn't want to do it forever. I wanted to go right. So it was, like Lenny Zero with Jock was like some of the first stuff I ever wrote professionally, and that kind of opened doors elsewhere.
Were you guys thrown together, Lenny? You and Jock, rather, on Lenny Zero? How did you guys first get together?
One of my first jobs as the office assistant, literally my first week, was there was a big pile of art and scripts, like the unsolicited submissions that nobody had had time to read, and it was literally about 2 or 3 feet high, piled up on a big plans chest in the corner of the office. And David Bishop said, "Right, your job now is to go through all of that and find out if there's anything good in there." I'm like, okay, here we go. And with scripts, it's harder because you've really got to focus on them and take the time. With artwork, you can just tell right away, like, this guy's got it or not, But I remember seeing, and Jock's artwork was in the pile. He'd done this amazing Dread headshot and a few other things. And like, as soon as I saw it, I just showed it straight to David Bishop, like, check this guy out. We've got to give this guy a job. It's great. So I kind of harangued David until he gave Jock a couple of short, like I think he did a couple of short stories, like Tharg's Future Shocks and like a 6-page Dread, that kind of thing. And as soon as I got the chance to work with him, I jumped at it. I wrote this Lenny Zero script for free just to save a bit of money from the budget, so we could put it towards a bigger name on the cover. And so I invited Jock to, like I said, would you be interested in drawing this little 10-page thing I'm doing? Yeah, he just, like, the rest is history. I love working with Jock. He's the nicest guy, but he just, well, I was saying before about, like, you want to give the readers as much bang for their buck as possible. Like, he really knows how to do that. He really knows how to sell a moment. When I'm kind of trying to have a big moment in the script, he knows how to sell that moment. Or, whether it's the look in somebody's eyes, they deliver a line, or some big action thing, whatever it is, he knows how to build a page around the wow moment, So he's a joy to work with.
The Future Shocks always intrigue me because, man, you guys are putting a lot of story into 4 pages when you do those things. And tell me, because that's a special kind of writing and art discipline that, because you don't have the real estate to really expand. So, was that tough to learn how to do 4-page stories?
No, because that's how I learned to write. Like, I started reading 2000 AD when I was 10 years old. So for me, that's what comics are. They're this incredibly condensed form of storytelling. Scott McCloud calls it closure, where you kind of like, you form a kind of like a mental link of meaning between one panel and the next, just like you do with film editing, And so there could be a whole chunk of story missing between the panels, but your brain puts it together, and that's inherently involving. And that's 2000 AD, especially the early stuff where they would just be hyper condensed. I think it's become a little bit more, it kind of allowed it, given itself a bit more breathing room these days. I mean, when I was a kid, Alan Moore once told a story from the point of view of a hydrogen atom that goes from the Big Bang creation of the universe to the final heat death of the universe. and he did it in like 1.5 pages, and it's a love story. It's about a hydrogen atom that falls in love with another molecule, you know, and it so like, but you know, he's Alan Moore, you know, but it's like, well, if you can tell that story in 1.5 pages, then there's kind of no excuse for anything else. Like, I say that now, like my characters are definitely getting more talky as I get older. You know, I'm slightly less. Something has to explode on every page, and now like, no, what if we actually let them have a conversation occasionally? You know, so suddenly I find myself running out of pages again.
No, I understand, man. You know, I always Bendis years ago told me, you know, it's the conversations that create good story opportunities. Because yeah, I mean, we've been reading. I mean, I'm 59. I've been reading, you know, since I was 4 or 5 years old, and you know, yeah, so I've seen every punch that Superman can throw at the Parasite. But it's like, well, what's the conversation? What's going on in their minds? That I think is more interesting sometimes. So I can certainly appreciate that. You know, I read an article, and I think it was when you came back to Lenny Zero, and it was on CBR. And at the time, Kickstarter was just coming to Great Britain, and you were really excited about it. And God, now it is such a factor, one of the factors of doing creator-owned books. Have you used it yourself? And also, how do you see Kickstarter and some of the other creator-owned platforms that are out there? That, you know, if you got an idea and you're burning with it, and you certainly have gathered an audience, that you can really kind of, you know, sidestep the publisher and make something and get a response.
Yeah, it's really tempting. Like I had intended to kind of jump into Kickstarter with both feet, you know, once it proved itself. But the bottom line is, I'm really disorganized. I'm terrible at admin, and you know, I think with the Kickstarter, you know, you're really running your own business, and I'm terrible at the business side of things. You know, like I'm an ideas guy, a story guy. I can sit there and, you know, write the script and, you know, figure out how to bring them to life with the dialogue and the action and story structure and stuff. But all of the other aspects, you know, I realize why there are publishing companies now. You know, if it was easy, everybody would do it. And just the idea of having, you know, 1,000 hardbacks that I've got to send out to 1,000 people and making sure everybody's paid the right amount for postage to different countries, like, I think it would give me a nervous breakdown, to be honest. And some people are really good at that stuff, and more power to them, you know, but I think I'm not that guy. You know, I kind of, like Dirty Harry once said, a man needs to know his own limitations, you know? So yeah, no, it would be, I wish I was better at admin, because Kickstarter is a great opportunity for doing that kind of stuff. I mean, that said, there on the Expanse, we put that together as a regular direct market book. You know, I'm doing it for a page rate, but they also on the side did a Kickstarter for these nice fancy hardback special editions, like collector's editions for the hardcore fans, and that Kickstarter made like $1.5 million. It was crazy. You know, like the fans just really want more of the Expanse, you know, and just seeing that, it's like, oh, okay, there's something going on here. You know, this is reaching people. You know, it's a different crowd from the Wednesday comic shop crowd. You know, it's people who maybe have never been in a comic shop before, and they want to know how they can buy the book. You know, and that's kind of trying to explain that to people who've just no idea how comic shops work or the direct market. You kind of realize it would be a lot easier if they could just walk into a shop and buy it, or just hit a button on Amazon. Of course, now the trades are coming out, they can do that. But yeah, it did make me think, you know, I should be making more of Kickstarter, but I know I would just end up having a nervous breakdown.
Well, I understand too, because again, the publisher is doing the heavy lifting as far as the administrative stuff. Have you ever, and forgive me, I forget the name of the author of the Expanse books. Have you ever had contact with them in terms of, you know, what you wanted?
They had to have approval on everything I was writing. So it's two guys. It's Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank, but they write together under the pen name James S.A. Corey. And so yeah, like originally I was only pitching for like a 4 issues out of 12. They were going to get 3 different writers, and I pitched my idea, sort of spinning off the end of season 6, and they kind of really liked it. And when they got back to me, you know what it's like when you're doing. We spoke over Zoom, you know. And along with some producers from the TV show and so on. And I had no idea how I did. Like, I'm just babbling. Like, am I even making sense? I don't know. like a job interview, basically.
Sure.
Then when they got back to me, there's like they invited me to write all 12. Like, okay, I guess they liked where I was coming from. And so, and I wrote it all up into an outline, and they had a couple of notes, but they're very minor, and for each issue, they'd have to approve it, each issue of script. But again, almost never any notes at all. I think in like issue 12, they asked me to remove one sentence of dialogue. The most tricky bit was, funnily enough, the last half of the final issue, where everything kind of comes to a head, because it's a story that kind of spans decades, and then all of the different story threads come to a head at the end of issue 12, and that was really tough because for continuity reasons I won't explain. But I did a thing like, oh, you can't do that thing because we need that for like a later book. Like, okay, and just that was tough, especially dealing with like trying to get the physics right. It's a big battle in space. It's like a hand-to-hand combat battle on the hull of a ship that's decelerating rapidly. So I'm having to think about like mass and inertia and who's got magnetic boots and who hasn't, and
certainly
travel it is. And of course, trying to explain all this to an artist in a script in a way that's kind of clear, because I can see it in my head, but it's complicated, But that's one of the things I love about The Expanse is the science makes sense, and it's like, gravity and mass and inertia is a big deal in the space battles in The Expanse, where people are getting thrown around like, peas in a whistle. It's great. I love it.
Andy, I'm telling you, this everything you're saying, and again, forgive the editorial about new Star Trek, that's exactly what they're not doing. And there is just some, I think, things that they put on screen that sure look cool, but it's like, man, and I would imagine this is the case of The Expanse too, where these are big giant ships, and you do have to worry about real science, and is this plausible? I mean, they had the captain on the hull of their ship as they were in warp drive, like riding on top of it like it was a skateboard. And yes, she had magnetic boots, but it's like, no, I don't believe what you're putting out there. So it's great that you guys for The Expanse are really worried about the logic behind the scenes and everything, and having to figure that out. It only makes it that much more interesting, because we can see it, we can visualize it, because it makes sense.
Yeah, I tell you, man, like what you just said, you're going to love The Expanse. It's like if you're looking for like hard sci-fi that's still got it's got everything, because it's got the politics and the diplomacy and the subterfuge. It's kind of, people describe it as like Game of Thrones in space, but it's got all that kind of little finger type stuff.
Sure.
But it's also just got the coolest gunfights. It's got espionage, and it's got the best space battles. There's no warp drive, there's no force fields, there's no laser guns. It's just ship to ship combat. But if the hull gets holed, then you lose all your air or your reactor explodes. It's intense, and they're shooting rail guns and rotary cannons at each other. It's great. I love it.
That's excellent. Am I missing anything current from you, Andy, as far as what we could talk about?
Well, I guess I should probably mention my book Cold Iron that I did with Nick Brokenshear. That was a comicsology book that we did digitally originally, which has now been collected by Dark Horse. It's a self-contained trade paperback from Dark Horse. Cold Iron. It's kind of like a modern day sinister. It's like a cross between a horror story and a fairy tale.
Okay.
It's set in the real world in the present day, but things from the ancient past are kind of creeping into our world. That's a book, and it's set in a place that's very close to my heart, which is the Isle of Man, which is right dead in the centre of the Irish Sea between England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, where all these kind of different cultures kind of converge. So that's something I was really proud of, and it was great working with Nick on it. Something I'm going to try and turn into a screenplay as well, because I see that as a movie in my head, and I kind of I would like to see that go somewhere, ideally one day.
Have you had any success in TV or film?
Funnily enough, I've had some interest in Cold Iron just recently. I can't talk about it because nothing's signed or sealed or whatever, and there's kind of complicated contract stuff. But as ever with Hollywood, I always kind of assume nothing's going to happen. Hope for the best, assume the worst, because I hate being disappointed.
I hear you.
But, never say never. I'm keeping my fingers and toes crossed.
Well, that's great to hear, because truly, I do appreciate your ideas. I've always enjoyed your crime work. And again, the superhero stuff's been great, and the espionage stuff has been great. So I'm surprised. I have a relationship with David Hyde and his Super Hype group, and they always send me weekly things regarding Comicsology books, and I don't know, but Cold Iron must have slipped by me
Well,
because
this like it was at Comixology, I guess, a couple of years ago. So
I see.
maybe,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Okay.
and it was I think last year that Dark Horse got the trade out. So
Okay,
yeah,
so it's out there for people.
Yeah,
Very
no,
good.
David Hyde and Pam, they do a great job at Superfan. Like, yeah, they were a pleasure to work with.
Good. Well, that's good to hear. Hey, man. Well, I'm certainly hoping there'll be some other announcements, maybe later this year, or whatever. But regardless, we've got Gotham by Gaslight, the Kryptonian Age. That's coming up. When does that debut? August?
No, it's coming up. I think the first issue's on sale like the week after next. I think it's the 11th of June. Yeah.
Excuse me.
And something I should mention, excuse me, is that Gotham by Gaslight, they're going to be nice, big, fat 32-page issues, 32 story pages in every issue. We're talking about trying to give the readers bang for their buck. Like, we're just cramming as much story in here as we can because there are so many characters and so many different storylines overlapping that we just needed the space, and DC have been really accommodating with that. So don't expect to see like the entire JLA in issue 1. It's a little bit of a slow burn. We start in Gotham and it'll gradually expand.
That's great. Mike Schelling over at DC gave me a look at that first issue. And so, yes, for clarification, everybody, June 11th, just a couple weeks away. And we'll get into Andy's version of the Gotham by Gaslight universe, if you will. Certainly the world. And that's great. No, honestly. And truly, man, pleasure meeting you. Great talking to you. Please come back. I will now. Bad news, Andy. I get your email now, so you're gonna, I won't Kathy Bates you, but I certainly, if I see that you've got something new, it'd be great to get you back and talk more. Because truly, I've really enjoyed your work over the years, and I always look forward to new Andy Diggle stories. Absolutely, man. So thanks for talking today, everybody. Thanks a lot for watching. More great word balloon. Hell, it's the end of May, so we got a brand new month, June. Don't worry, great stuff coming up. I hope you'll join me with other great conversations with some fantastic creators. Until next time, everybody stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.